From Leon-only prototypes, to disturbing scrapped segments, all the way to a cancelled multiplayer build, here is the cut content of Resident Evil 9. In one of the early builds for RE9, the devs designed the game to be solely focused on Leon. Grace Ashcroft wasn't even in the picture at one point. The team wanted to return to the main narrative of the saga that is Raccoon City, after RE7 and RE8 strayed too far from it. And since the iconic main character of those games has been Leon, they planned on bringing him back and designing a horror-focused experience with him. However, further on in development, the team concluded that creating a game experience that could genuinely scare Leon felt like a bit of a stretch, given everything he had already been through as an accomplished agent in RE4 and RE6. So this build was ultimately cut, and that's when they brought in Grace to still capture that horror experience while still keeping Leon in for the intense action as well. Within the footage Capcom showed, it appears that Leon was going to show up to the Renwood Hotel instead of Grace. It is shown that he still has a similar style, wearing the same black jacket and arming himself with the Requiem hand cannon. Meanwhile, some of the environments look slightly altered, like the outside alleyway, along with the inside of the hotel. Unlike the final build, which had an abandoned look from the fire damage years prior, in this build, the hotel looks completely functional and is still seemingly operating when Leon arrives, as we can see that the power is still on in the building. This highlights an interesting detail in regards to the story. Since Grace wasn't in the picture at the time, none of that additional story with her and Alyssa was even a thought. Instead of Grace witnessing her mother's death and the building being set ablaze, the Leon build reveals a completely different story of him investigating the still functioning hotel, a story that we may never know about. Aside from the scrapped build, RE9's concept art gives us a bigger glimpse into some initial designs and ideas that we never got to see in the final game. Like in Grace's concept art, for example, it looks like at one point there was going to be a cutscene during her investigation of the Renwood Hotel, where she would lie on the floor next to body tape and take notes of her observations. Taking a closer look at Alyssa's concept art, we can see some interesting early sketches while her and Grace were spending the night at the hotel. Instead of being hunted by a single infected assassin, this drawing showcases multiple hooded men going in to attack her. Interestingly, we can see flames in the background, implying that they always intended for the building to in some way be set ablaze. In the other drawing, it looks like there was going to be a scene with Alyssa and Grace hiding behind a desk in hopes to avoid the assassin. Maybe instead of meeting the hotel staff face to face, this was them hiding from afar as they watched him sadly get assassinated. Now, as we dive into Sherry's concept art, we can see that there was originally going to be a cutscene with both her and Leon. This was probably set to take place near the beginning of the game, where the two would get their introductions while discussing their Raccoon City Syndrome illness and the ongoing investigation. Something else worth mentioning is the different outfit worn by Leon that kind of looks something similar to his design in Infinite Darkness. As we progress to the Care Center art, although it's a small detail, it looks like there were originally plans to have a row of seats in the middle of the building, which were ultimately never implemented, probably to keep this room having a more open feeling. Another piece of concept art from the hospital shows what looks to be a zombified staff member feasting on a large rodent at the staircase. Maybe there was going to be a small scene where Grace hides behind the corner and witnesses this dark and gruesome tragedy occur. Whatever the case may be, this was probably cut for it being too disturbing. Now on to the Raccoon City art. The area where we encounter the giant spider was going to be a lot different. Instead of small webs decorating its home, this art shows an entire ecosystem in which it lives in, with webs having completely taken over the area and holding various vehicles and debris, and even other infected saved for its next meal. This was ultimately toned down heavily in the final game, likely to keep the spider's appearance more of a surprise. With there being barely any webs leading up to its first encounter, I think a lot of people, including myself, were pretty caught off guard when it appeared to attack Leon. Another interesting concept for the spider showcases that the creature was originally going to emerge out of a dark parking garage, but it was probably removed in favor of having the creature sneak up on Leon. Moving on to the motorcycle chase, it is revealed that the zombie dogs that pursue after Leon were initially designed to be much larger, to the point where they completely towered over Leon on his bike. This honestly would have been absolutely terrifying to go up against, and it was likely altered for a more realistic zombie dog style, like those we've seen in past entries. Then, as we make our way to the RPD, the sketches show that both the station and orphanage were planned to have a much darker and foggier atmosphere. I've also seen people bring up that it kinda looks like it's snowing, and I think the orphanage art best showcases that, as we can see the trees and ground have the white shade to them, but at the same time, this could also very well just be ashes. Now this next concept is probably the darkest out of them all, as it looks to be a scrapped segment for the horrific cloning experiments taking place at the orphanage. We can see 4 children forcibly lined up on a wall to be further examined, and it looks like one of the kids is being fed some sort of drug while the doctors stand close by to take notes. While this would have given us more insight on the full operations taking place at the orphanage, it's probably a good thing this was removed, as it would have been just way too disturbing. And finally, once we get to the batch of concept art for the Arc Lab, the character model for Hunk can be seen in nearly every single one somewhere in frame. Not only does this give further proof for the commander being Hunk, but it also makes it seem that the soldier was originally planned to play a much larger role, and possibly continue to pursue Leon throughout the building. So yes, as I said in the intro, RE9 originally did start as an online open world multiplayer game that would have a similar playstyle to Resident Evil 6. The developers spent a lot of time experimenting with it and coming up with interesting concepts. But in the end, this build was ultimately scrapped when they realized it wasn't something fans would want to see and play. And that's when the devs went back to the drawing board and created what would lead to the final build of Requiem. Even though very little footage of this build was shown, there's still a ton of interesting details scattered throughout, starting with the heads-up display. At the bottom right-hand corner of each clip, there seems to be some button prompts for special abilities that are unique for each character, and that can only be used when collecting a specific number of crafting materials. In the first clip, we can see what looks like some sort of healing ability to cure yourself or nearby teammates, so this was probably the medic class of character. Right next to that, there is another ability with the skull icon that might have been an ability to cure certain status ailments like poison or infection. This next class has an ability icon with a zigzag arrow, which could maybe mean some type of super speed mechanic that gives the player heightened agility for a small period of time. And then, the last class revealed seems to be some sort of defender/equipment type character, as we can see what looks to be a riot shield ability, along with a hammer that could possibly be a special weapon, or maybe it was used to go along with the crafting mechanic. As for the settings and environments, with the few clips they showed, we could first see what looks like a foggy forest area. If they were intending for this build to also take place in Raccoon City, then maybe this could have been located somewhere in the Arclay Forest right outside of town. Next, we have what looks to be a gun shop, as we can see a shotgun stock used for the store sign. And then the last 2 areas shown are a lot harder to make out, but the one looks like they are inside some sort of building, while the other looks like some outside area in the city because of the fence on the left side and the whole area itself being super foggy. The enemies themselves are a little harder to make out due to their environments, but it looks like the only thing shown is your typical infected zombie, along with a tyrant bioweapon that confronts the players in the fog. Character models are also hard to make out, besides one in the gun shop scene that's a girl with blonde hair. And the last thing worth pointing out is a percentage bar that appears at the top right of each clip, with some being higher than others. This could very well be a mechanic taken from the Outbreak games, where it acts as some sort of virus gauge to determine how long a player may spend on a particular level. Once the gauge reaches 100% on a single player, the character turns into a zombie, resulting in a game over. But on the other hand, if you're playing the online mode, as the player becomes a zombie, they become able to attack other nearby players. Although this build was ultimately cut, it showcases how insanely different RE9 could have turned out. Instead of fear, isolation, and story, we almost got another online multiplayer experience, which is something Capcom has seemingly been struggling to perfect over the recent years. Click this video here to learn about the full tragic story of Emily and Marie. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.